Hello, my wonderful AP Psych students. Um, if you're listening to this, we've either had a snow day or you were absent. But either way, let's do a little discussion about research methods and the scientific attitude. Really assuming that a lot of you taking this class, this is not anything new. So I'm just going to highlight some of the aspects and hope that with your checks for understanding, we can figure out what you know and what you don't know. We probably did the thumb wrestling lab yesterday, and so we got a good taste of this as well, and I felt really confident about what you were doing. So when we talk about the scientific attitude, the three main aspects that contribute to this are curiosity, skepticism, and humility. Curiosity, first of all, we need to do some research and look for some alternative explanations because just with our research findings, we still need to look at, well, why did they happen the way that they did? Is there an alternate explanation? That's really intellectual curiosity, and we want you to have that. Skepticism, oh, the old anecdotal evidence. But I knew a guy who did this one thing, and this was the outcome. We have to be very, very careful. If you did the reading for this, one of my favorite quotes from the book is that the plural of anecdotal evidence is not fact. Okay? I can have a very strong experience, but that doesn't mean that that's what's always going to happen. So again, we need to do research. We need to use a scientific method. And then humility. Could I possibly be wrong? Now, I know you are all geniuses, but even geniuses are wrong. And so, again, we need to be questioning these things. And to do that, we do an empirical approach. We let the facts speak for themselves. We want to find evidence. We want to find data that supports this. But again, we don't want to be too fooled by data. We still want to look at, okay, how is this set up? Who was the sample? All of those are really, really good questions. And all sciences use the scientific method because they want to reduce bias. Whether it's chemistry or psychology, we all use the scientific method. And as psychologists like to say, it's harder for us. We have more variables. So, yeah, it is a science. It's definitely a science. And then finally, common sense. A lot of people think, oh, psychology is just common sense. Well, common sense, as it says there, more easily describes what has happened than what will happen. So that research is so important. So as we're going through this, make sure you are using your metacognitive skills and really thinking about your thinking. If I have an opinion, if I think something is the truth, that's fine, but why do I think that? And I'm not saying we're wrong. We're just saying, hey, let's think about how we developed those attitudes. So, speaking of attitudes, there are limits to our intuition. And hopefully you did read this part because these are there's again, three things that limit our intuition and make us say even more, we've got to do some research here. So the first one is overconfident, being more confident about your answer than you are correct. A lot of times we kind of use the rule of thumb, those heuristics. And I trying to remember the example from your reading, but it was like geographic locations and which one is further north. And, we kind of picture in our mind these locations, but a lot of times we're more confident, oh, yes, Madrid is further north than we are correct. So we've got to be careful with that. We've got to do some fact checking, if you will. We also have to be careful about hindsight bias. Oh, after the fact, I knew it was fine. So, like, for instance, if you come in and your homework's not done and we discuss the answers, you might be very apt to go, oh, yeah, that's the answer I would have put. Of course, that's the right answer. I would have put that answer down. Hindsight is 2020. And then the confirmation bias. This again, we tend to see what we want to see. We tend to search for evidence that already supports our opinion, when really we learn just as much from getting things that don't support our opinion. If we were in class today, we would have done a little example, a little experiment where I give you a number sequence of 2, 4, 6. And that would be the example. And then you would have to come up with the rule for that. Well, I would tell you if you were correct or incorrect. Most people think the rule is increasing by 2. That's not the rule. The rule is actually just increasing numbers. And so in that case, trying to get a wrong answer to disprove your theory actually gets you closer to the rule I would have asked. But anyway, that's okay. We're going to keep working with that. Like this little comic here, most people would rather have a reassuring lie, okay, rather than the truth. And so we do have limits. And then this one just cracks me up. Thank you to Mr. Prinny for finding this. It says hindsight bias. And so if someone getting into an ambulance, although we gave him all the money and support, I always had my doubts that Jim could build his own helicopter. Yeah. Well, of course, it's easy to say you had doubts when it didn't, in fact, work out. So be aware of those things. All right. Doing research itself, we're always going to start with a hypothesis to test theory. You've got those in your notes. I think you're pretty good at looking at those. Here's just kind of a nice little handy dandy little graphic as well. But you know that your hypotheses for this class need to be written in an if-then example, okay? And again, we practiced that yesterday with thumb rustling, and you'll get, oh, so many practices with that. Within the hypothesis, we have the independent variable and the dependent variable. Independent variable is controlled by the researcher, okay? Dependent variable, you could really say, is controlled by the participants. It's the participants' outcome. And then we have these, this is something that might be new, and we're going to keep working on this. We have these things called operational definitions. So I take the independent and dependent variables, and I have to put them in such a manner that they are specific and measurable. I need some sort of numbers with them. And so let's say I might do something like, hey, if we have a snow day, then students will be happy. Okay, so what do I define as snow day? That's pretty easy. Okay, school is canceled because of weather conditions at least 20 minutes before school starts. Okay, I've defined it and I've used a number in there. But what about happiness? Students will be happy. How can I measure happiness? Well, one way is I can make a scale of 1 to 5. Students will be a 5, but I have to have a number. Students will be 80% more happy than if they did have school. I mean, it just, you have to put a number in there. Now, the tricky thing is when you're looking at research, sometimes it's already written in there for you, but sometimes you, as the consumer of the research, have to make it up for me. So be aware of that. Like I said, we'll do lots of practice. And by having operational definitions, it helps other people to replicate your study. And the more a study is replicated, the more valid it becomes. Because like, yep, I tried this, I did this, it happened again. So if we were in school, we were going to do the Lego lab. I'll probably find a way to squeeze that in. So it's just a way to practice operational definitions. All right, so once we kind of have our design, then we have to figure out who we're using in our research. And so big issue. And again, I think this is easy to understand, but it's also easy to forget. So you've got to pay attention to this. We need to have a population, and then we need to get a sample of that population. And so getting a sample, we can do that a couple different ways. Well, we can do it a lot of different ways. Some are better than others, okay? So first of all, we can do random sampling, where everybody in the population gets an equal chance of actually being selected. So that might be like low tech, putting everybody in the population, putting their names in a hat and drawing them from a hat, okay? Or a little bit easier, a little bit more high tech, random number generators. Assigning, if let's say Linmar is my population, and I want to test students on how happy they are when we have a snow day, and I only have juniors and seniors, so I better get all of Linmar. So I can assign every student a number, and then my random number generator will then pick what numbers of kids I'm actually testing. So that's a great way to do it if you can. Hopefully, you know that volunteers are not random because there's something going to be significantly different about people who do volunteer to be part of it. So that makes a biased sample. And a lot of times, yep, samples are biased, even though we try not to. The other big difference is a representative sample. And this is what I really need you to understand. And I have this in your binder as well. But with a representative sample, there we go. Whatever the important demographics are of the population, we make sure they're matched percentage wise in the sample. So like, let's say, again, if I'm using Linn-Mar, and even if I'm just using Linn-Mar High School, I want to make sure that whatever percentage of seniors make up the student body, I have that same percentage of seniors in my actual research study. That's, again, super, super ideal, but as you can tell, it's going to take more time to do that. And so we've got random sampling, we've got random assignment. When I assign students, excuse me, people into their actual groups. So I've already selected my groups, but then when I assign them to experimental or control groups, I need to randomly assign them to that as well. And so there needs to be a comparison across all the levels of the variable. So if I want to look at, again, grades, student grades, then I need to have people represented in each of those. And so let's say that I'm going to do something, people are going to come into class, and I'm going to assign them into one of two groups. And to do it randomly, I'm just going to flip a coin. And if it's a heads, you're in group 1. If it's tails, you're in group 2. So we have not only random and representative sampling, but we also have random assignment. Similar but different in their approaches, okay? Oh, and there's another little graphic for you there. All right, so research methods. Two big categories of research methods, correlation and experimental. Correlation, we have correlation is not causation. I'll make you say that for me a million times. But these are things that are so open-ended that we just don't control the variables. So we cannot say that the two variables in the hypothesis are cause and effect. Okay, all we can say is that there's a relationship. The book talks about these as descriptive, and specific examples are case studies, surveys, and naturalistic, just not enough control. Experimental methods, there's only 2 of them, but these do have enough control so that we can say the independent variable is influencing the dependent variable, or if you want to say the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So a couple mnemonics for you. I was blinded in the laboratory because blind studies and laboratory studies are the 2 experimental. A placebo used in a blind study must be an object, not just not knowing, an object. So if I'm given a drink, is it caffeinated or uncaffeinated? But I actually have a drink in front of me, okay? Or I didn't know I was being watched. That's not a placebo. That's just not knowing something, okay? And then finally, just a few clarifications. When we do experiments versus correlations, we're still going to always talk about independent and dependent variable, even though technically with correlational studies, we don't, since we can't prove cause and effect, we would actually call it a predictor and a criterion, and those 2 variables can be switched around, but we'll be pretty consistent with IV and DV. Remember, your confounding variables are not listed within the hypothesis. Those are things you think of, and we thought of a ton of those for our thumb wrestling lab yesterday. Controlled variables, those are intentionally dictated by the researcher, and so do just kind of highlight that idea. Some core things that are not good research, self-reports. Again, we're going to get into that hindsight bias, so they're not very reliable. And these things called ex post research done after the fact, again, not reliable. We've got that hindsight bias there. Operational definitions, we've already talked about those. And oh, there's a little reflection section in your binder, and I'm running out of time. So continue on with this stuff on PowerSchool Learning, and I will see you soon.